Good evening. We begin tonight in Nairobi, the scene this week of violent and deadly protests. The Kenyan president had hoped that his decision to drop his controversial finance bill would bring some calm, but thousands of mostly young people suspicious of what they see as a corrupt and out-of-touch government were on the streets again today. Tonight, we hear the anger of a generation refusing to back down. Sky's Africa correspondent, Yusra El-Bagir, sent this report from the capital.
It's a dance of defiance. Quickly dispersed, with tear gas and stun grenades testing their stand. It's not over. A young man is singled out. He's chased, beaten, and then dragged away in broad daylight, into the darkness of the security apparatus, like many others over the last few days.
What does it feel like for you in these scenes in your city? Keep the mask on if you have to.
This is, first of all, this is really crazy. The sense that, we are trying as much as possible to mobilize and have a peaceful demonstrations, but the government is trying to use all its tools capable just to suppress us.
But these are the crowds that won't be cowed, facing off against riot police in the heart of their city.
Every time they gather, they're dispersed with tear gas. Every time they barricade a road, the police come and break it up. But the sheer fearlessness and persistence of these guys is astonishing.
They're chased, choked by tear gas, hit with rubber bullets, and far worse.
What did the last week look like in terms of protesters' injuries?
It was chaotic. We had what we call mass casualties. We had a lot of referrals. We had a lot of gunshot wounds, both live and bullets. Like now, these are rubber bullets. These are rubber bullets I'm holding. So it was crazy.
The craziness hasn't been quelled by the president's concessions. And though unarmed, they're not defenseless.
Are you not scared facing up against the police?
No, I'm not going to die on my knees. I'm going to die on my feet.
It's a tough battle, and we know who has the upper hand. But the protesters have made it very clear they won't go down without a fight.
And Yusra joins me live now from Nairobi. Yusra, when we spoke a few days ago, it was all about the president, doubling down, sending the military onto the streets, saying that he was going to deploy the troops to help the police. He has backed down now from that finance bill, but it doesn't feel like it's making any kind of difference.
Absolutely. I mean, they see this bill as a symptom of a bigger issue. And the protesters we spoke to today said that this isn't about a bill, this is about bad governance. I think the young people that are taking to the streets are incredibly aware, they're incredibly engaged, and they feel like the government is flagrantly overspending, is showing off their excess. The MPs in Kenya are some of the highest paid in the world, and yet telling them to start their lives off on the back foot with facing these taxes, with dealing with the unemployment that President Ruto himself said during his election campaign 2 years ago that he would actively work to tackle. I mean, today the scenes were pretty crazy. I mean, it was this constant face-off between protesters and the police. They would disperse them, they'd use the stun grenades, they'd pluck men out of the crowd, put them in the back of the truck, and they would go into the darkness of the apparatus like many other young men and activists over the last week. But it was just crazy to see them continue to go back, to gather, to face off with them with such courage and such persistence. And I think that is what President Ruto is up against. He's up against a generation that won't be cowed by concessions and won't step down lightly.
Yeah, and Yusra, the other point is that President Ruto has bowed down mostly because of international pressure on him from the UN, from the international community. I mean, where does this leave his standing in general?
I think it's clear that he's hyper aware of how he's being perceived and Kenya's position as the strongest economy in East Africa, as a key defense partner for Western countries. I mean, the day that Parliament was raided by protesters, the US announced that they were designating Kenya as a major non-NATO ally. And then these scenes kind of play out in a way that is obviously quite distressing, but also sounds alarm bells. President Ruto actually got a call from US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken yesterday, and he thanked him, the State Department said, for taking steps to reduce tensions and pledging to engage in dialogue. He also underscored the importance of security forces demonstrating restraint. And I think that's what we've been seeing, is the riot police have clearly kind of stopped firing live rounds into the crowds, but there's still tension, and we'll have to see how things go.
OK, Yusra, thank you so much for all of your reporting throughout the day. And of course, we will be following all the developments there in Kenya. Well, as Yusra said, the president has withdrawn his finance bill, but it doesn't appear to have made much of a difference. I've been speaking to opposition MP Caleb Amisi about why voters feel so strongly about William Ruto and his government.
After the president withdrew the finance bill, the protest still continues because people no longer want to hear about the president. They now want him to go home.
Yeah, just tell us about that U-turn, because just a few days ago, he was describing the protests as treacherous. He buckled down and said he would deploy the army onto the streets to help the police. So this is quite a U-turn for the president.
Even after bowing down and decided to stop the finance bill, the people are not trusting him. He does not carry the trust of the citizens who believe that it is a decoy. That
where does that now leave the president? Because, of course, he came into power vowing to clamp down on corruption, vowing to crack down on mismanagement of funds. And yet this is something that many people are now accusing his government of.
Yes, people feel that there is blatant corruption in his government that has never been witnessed before, especially when the country is grappling with high cost of living, grappling with unemployment, and especially with the joblessness that has bedeviled this country because of the youth population bulge.
Yeah, and actually this entire demonstration, mobilization, is being led by young people who are using things like social media to come out onto the streets. Many of them are saying they now live in fear. Those who were arrested and detained say they're in hiding because they're worried about being detained again. What would you say to them tonight, and what would you say to the president and the government?
I want to encourage. I'm serving my second term as a member of parliament. I went to parliament when I was 29 years old. I belong to that group of generation we call Generation Z, Gen Z, who have basically the force behind this sort of a revolution. And we just want to encourage them because the government works for the people. For a long time, we've not had a government that listens to the views of the people. We've had a government that clamps down to the voices of the opposition. But now a generation that is so organized, a generation that is techno-savvy, a generation that is energetic, is innovative, it is charismatic, it organizes itself through using technology, and it is able to mobilize people across the country. We have seen demonstration virtually in every city of the nation. That is a clear lack of confidence, and is a clear message to the president that he is no longer wanted. The whole country, including his home, where the president comes from, Eldoret, there is a massive demonstration in his homeland. That is a clear message of no confidence vote.
Do you think he will step down?
The pressure is building. The pressure is building. People are growing angry every day. The more he introduces military to the streets against the Kenyan law does not allow military to interfere with the internal strife or internal tumult. But we have seen a situation whereby military was hurriedly put on the streets to scare people away, but people are not scared. People are determined. The young generation are determined, and they are saying they will not leave the streets until the president resigns.
That was Kenyan MP Caleb Amisi speaking to me earlier. Now let's turn to a topic we'll be coming back to over this year, elections. Last night, Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer went head-to-head. Tonight, it's the turn of two men with a bitter history. For millions of American voters, the first debate between Joe Biden and Donald Trump will be the first time they sit up and pay attention. They last faced off in 2020 in a tense clash with an exacerbated Mr. Biden asking his rival to shut up. This time round, age will be a factor. Trump's campaign have already suggested the president will need performance-enhancing drugs to stay awake, that he's too old and senile to lead. But he will still have to work hard to win over distrustful voters who think he's obsessed with seeking revenge. It's a high-stakes moment which could help pave the road to the White House. We'll hear from senior representatives in both camps in a moment. But first, our US correspondent James Matthews reports from Atlanta.
You can measure the importance he places on the occasion in days spent preparing. Joe Biden has been holed up in mock debates for a week. If this isn't a must-win, it's a must-not-lose.
When you think about the Joe Biden you saw in the debate...
If there was any doubt infirmity would be centre stage, it was removed by a debate day Trump campaign ad.
Got taken down by his bike. Lost a fight with his jacket.
It is the issue of age concern, shared by most Americans, as their oldest ever candidates take the stage here. In the frailty contest, both have history.
Saudi Arabia and Russia will repeat.
A road to the White House that passes through Atlanta will extend far into the presidential campaign. Issues here will include the economy, abortion, immigration, and democracy post-election. And there's the men themselves, meeting the moment in a close contest.
A few months in front of the election, and it's going to depend on probably a couple of 100,000 people in 4 or 5 states. Then all of a sudden, everything little matters. And when you have high stakes like that, and every little thing matters, it makes for must-see TV.
There will be no studio audience, only 2 moderators. Microphones can be cut so that only the designated speaker will be heard. Joe Biden's team won a coin toss to position him on the right-hand side of the TV screen. The White House isn't saying why, but experts in this industry believe the viewer's eye is drawn towards the right. In choosing his position, Biden has given Donald Trump the opportunity to make the final statement. Trump's voice will be the last one heard.
President Biden and Donald Trump will face off.
They've been trailing this event for weeks.
We will have the most consequential 90 minutes.
As befits a debate that could define a political campaign. If there are to be pivot points in this presidential contest, Atlanta could be the most pivotal of all. James Matthews, Sky News, in Atlanta, Georgia.
So how will it all play out tonight, and what will the main attack lines be? Well, let's bring in Hannah Muldavin, Senior Spokesperson for the Democratic National Committee. Thank you so much, Hannah, for joining us on the programme. How is the President doing, and how is he preparing for tonight?
Thank you for having me. The president just landed in Atlanta, and I can tell you that what the American people are going to see on the stage tonight is a president who is fighting for them in President Joe Biden. They're going to see a contrast between that, a president who's fighting for them and making sure every American has a fair shot, and the man that will be standing across from him on the stage, Donald Trump. Now, if you remember, this is the first time these two will be meeting on a debate stage in 4 years.
And months ahead of the election, and President Biden and his team putting a number of conditions, we've just heard in our report those conditions. But, you say that this is a president who will be fighting for Americans, but that doesn't seem to be how Americans are currently feeling when you look at the polls.
Right now, this is the job of the campaign and the Biden-Harris campaign and the Democratic National Committee, right? We want to show how the president is working for the American people. There's an economy that Joe Biden created with 15 million new jobs, the lowest unemployment rate in 50 years in the United States. And he's also fighting for low costs. He took on big pharma here in the
Punching
U.S.,
through, though,
bringing
is
down
it? I
costs
mean,
of drug
we
prices.
hear a lot about what Joe Biden is doing for the economy, and economists, no doubt, are saying there are improvements, but that is not punching through with the American voter. They still feel, as though it's not bringing about any form of change for them personally.
This will be a really good chance for Joe Biden to talk to them about that, not just about the accomplishments that I just mentioned, but about what his future plans are to continue to bring down some of those higher prices, which Joe Biden is going to do, right? That's what Americans care about. And I think you'll see Joe Biden do that today. He'll talk to them. I can tell you, you won't hear that from former President Donald Trump, who has a campaign of retribution, who said he's going to be a dictator on day one. This is a man who is fighting for himself and not for the American people.
And yet, the polls that we're seeing show that he will potentially win 5 of the 7 swing states. I mean, ultimately, this comes down to a handful of states. And at the moment, Donald Trump is ahead in the polls. What do you put that down to? I mean, you say that Joe Biden is listening to what Americans are saying. That's certainly not what the polls are showing.
When you look to the elections that have happened since Joe Biden won, since 2020, so the midterms in 2022, when Democrats run on the agenda of Joe Biden, they win. We see that not only in more liberal states, but in really conservative states like Kentucky, where a Democratic governor won that seat. So when it comes to what the American people are feeling, we should look to how they actually voted. And in that case, they voted for the agenda of President Biden. And the Republican Party is not all behind former President Donald Trump. We saw in Indiana, a pretty conservative state, 20% of the vote go to Nikki Haley in that primary.
Yeah, but
So let's
at
look
the
at how
moment,
people
I mean,
voted when we see that.
We know that Donald Trump is dominating the Republican Party. He is the candidate, and he is ahead in the polls at present. I mean, we are 4 months ahead of the election, and that does make a difference. The other thing that many are saying that Donald Trump will be focusing on is Joe Biden's age, his stumbles, the gaffes that we see, the inability to remember certain names and situations, the fact that we see all of these things go viral on social media and get picked up and then passed around. These are the things that also worry American people. Will he have the ability and the stamina to be able to run the country for the next 4 years?
This is going to be a great chance for Joe Biden to do that, to talk to the American people today. What I'll say, and President Biden has said this himself, he's no young sprite, but with that comes a lot of wisdom. And when you compare that to Donald Trump, who he's going up against, they're basically the same age. I will also mention that what you don't see as much is Donald Trump when he's at some of his rallies that he's been hosting, where he rambles, he says inaccurate facts all the time. It doesn't get as much pickup in the media oftentimes, but I think we'll have a chance to see that, the American people will, on the debate stage today.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that a lot of what Joe Biden says doesn't also get a lot of pickup, does it? I mean, when he gets names of allies wrong, for example, he gets countries' names wrong. He forgets facts and information. And we are told that he's fed a lot by his staff, and he won't have the ability to speak to his staff during the ad breaks in these debates. Do you think that will pose a huge problem for him?
I think when you watch the debate tonight, it will be very clear who is there to fight for the American people on the record that they've done, and who is there to fight for themselves, to be a dictator, to be anti-American, and to frankly have an agenda that takes away rights from women. We saw an abortion decision come out today. A lot of people I talk to are really concerned about the state of abortion. So I think that's what the American people want. They want a president who will fight for them, who's an honest man. I don't think anyone would say that Joe Biden isn't an honest man who really cares about people. And that's the big difference I think you'll see come out on the debate stage tonight from Joe Biden and Donald Trump.
Hannah Muldavin, thank you so much for joining us here on the program. I'm joined now by the Trump campaign's Deputy Comms Director, Caroline Sunshine. Thank you so much, Caroline, for joining us here on the programme. One of the things that we just heard from Hannah Muldavin, the senior spokesperson for the Democratic National Committee, is that Donald Trump will be focused on revenge and retribution, that he will revert back to his performance in 2020, which did put off a lot of people.
Well, President Trump has said just a couple of weeks ago on Capitol Hill that he intends to be a president for all Americans. It's incorrect. President Trump has also said success will be our revenge. It's really actually Joe Biden that is obsessed with revenge and retribution. I mean, we watched Joe Biden and his campaign weaponize the government against President Trump in a sham trial and a sham verdict that was just handed down in New York City this past month, which, by the way, has had zero effect in the polls except helping President Trump continue to rise and make inroads with demographics that aren't traditionally part of the Republican Party. And that's because the American people care about the reality that they have to live in every day that Joe Biden and his policies have created. An economy that isn't working for anybody, a wide open border. And that's what the American people care about. Joe Biden refuses to acknowledge that reality or talk about it at all. He's obsessed with the past, obsessed with revenge and retribution. And that's not a winning message with the American people.
But so is Donald Trump on so many levels. When we hear what he has to say at rallies, his focus is on questioning the outcome of the election, for example. You know, his focus is on attacking Joe Biden rather than talking about actual policies. Do you think that this is a high-stakes situation for Donald Trump? Because, of course, there isn't an audience, for example. He feeds off the audience a lot of the time, especially when he's campaigning. Do you think that that will be detrimental to him tonight?
President Trump's focus is on the American people and on policy ideas that benefit them. He was just in Las Vegas, Nevada last week, for example, while Joe Biden was attending a fundraiser cloistered away, having to be babysat by Barack Obama on stage. Meanwhile, President Trump was in Las Vegas, Nevada. He was standing in front of a crowd for more than 90 minutes, I might add, in front of thousands of Americans, announcing a brand new policy called no tax on tips for American hospitality workers. American hospitality workers are some of our lower wage workers. Their tips are extremely important to them. This policy, no tax on tips, is meant to directly help alleviate the economic suffering inflicted on the American people. Same thing. President Trump cares about being with the victims of crimes in Joe Biden's America. President Trump was honored last week to speak with Rachel Morin's mother. Rachel Morin was a mother in the United States, a mother of 5, who was murdered allegedly by an illegal immigrant who should have never been allowed into the United States in the first place. So President Trump stands with the victims of those crimes.
Caroline, if I can just have you focus on tonight's debate. It is 90 minutes, as we said. There are certain rules that need to be adhered to, including no audience, mics being turned off so that people don't, interrupt. What is the strategy that Donald Trump is going to adopt? Because, like I said, in 2020, it did reflect badly the number of times in which he was interrupting, and he was told by Joe Biden at one point to shut up.
Well, President Trump's going to speak the truth. He's going to speak the truth about his record, and I guess Joe Biden's going to have to speak the truth about his, because this is the first time in a century that American voters have the opportunity tonight. Sure, there isn't a live audience there, but the real audience tonight is the American people, and that's who President Trump is going on that stage to fight for. I don't know who Joe Biden is fighting for. I don't even know if Joe Biden knows who he's fighting for. But the American people tonight,
economists will say and back his economic policies and say that there have been improvements to the economy. It's just not punching through with the American people at this stage.
The only economists who are saying that are actually economists who are Democrat donors, like Janet Yellen's husband, who made a donation to the Biden campaign and then conveniently said she thinks this economy is working. Joe Biden was also warned, by the way, by extremely liberal economists that should he spend the way that he has, we would see the levels of inflation that we're saying. There's no amount of gaslighting. Like, the American people are so smart. The American people, you have to understand, are showing up every day to $4 and $5 a gallon gas prices. The credit card rate, our APR rate in the United States is 22%. 9% of those bills are ending in delinquencies. Like, Caroline, you cannot gaslight the American people into thinking that this economy is working for them.
I'm just asking legitimate questions. No one's trying here to gaslight anyone. We're trying to have a fair discussion. The other reality is, though, that there is a lot of apathy as well. That the American people have been served up 2 people, it feels like Back to the Future, 2 men, one in his late 70s, one in his early 80s. The younger voters, those that they're trying to really focus on tonight, feel like they don't really have 2 good options, that it's a bad option either way.
No, what the American people are going to see tonight, which is, again, why you're seeing President Trump not only go up in the polls with Republicans, but with voters who are not traditionally part of the Republican base, is because for the first time in a century, the American people will compare the records back to back of two former U.S. presidents. And that contrast couldn't be clearer. Under President Trump, we had the most secure border in U.S. history. We had an economy that was uplifting and working all Americans, where the inflation rate was 1.9%, gas was $1.69. We were, our country, the United States, was respected.
He lost the 2020 election. So, you know, you're talking about his past record, but it wasn't enough for him to
The American people aren't living in the past, though. The Democrats and Joe Biden want to live in the past. The American people are living in the present, and they care about their future. And the reason President Trump is going up in the polls and why he will perform well on that debate stage tonight is because he is most trusted on the issues that are most important to the American people today, which is the inflation, the economy, and immigration.
Okay, well, we'll have to wait and see how that debate goes in the next few hours. Caroline, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Stay with us because we'll be going live to the spin room ahead of the presidential debate. Our US correspondent James Matthews is there as Donald Trump and President Biden prepare to face the cameras.
Have breached the road. There is a lot of gas being fired all around us. It is an absolute carnival kind of atmosphere out here for Prime Minister Modi's decisive victory. These students are defying the prohibitory order, and now they're going to be arrested. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. The roads have been inundated. The only way out is to get people by boat. This on any given day would have been bustling with people, but today it's absolutely deserted. I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Welcome back. Let's return to the US now. Before the break, we were hearing from both Biden and Trump camps ahead of the first televised debate of this year's election. Well, let's go straight to our US correspondent, James Matthews, who's at the event in Atlanta. James, really good to see you. I mean, this really, truly is a decisive moment, isn't it? A high-stakes debate 4 months ahead of the election.
Yeah, 4 months, very early, Yalda, the earliest that we've had a TV debate, and that's all down to Joe Biden, who clearly sees the need or feels the need to seize the momentum, the initiative at this early stage in the election campaign, because simply he doesn't have it. The polls have been stubborn. Biden needs to shift them, and he feels that he can do it in this 90-minute coming together with his old foe. It will be important. The hard politics will be key. The issues, abortion in particular, on today of all days, after events in the Supreme Court. Biden is certain to come here and say to women across the country who have given traction to the Democratic cause that he is fighting on their side, and will try to nail Donald Trump to the wall on what Biden would see as an incoherent policy on abortion. So that will be one of the key areas of subject matter. Also, Donald Trump's history, democracy after the election. Biden will characterize Trump as the man who would be hell-bent on self-interest and retribution should he be elected. We expect him to raise the subject of January the 6th and essentially bait Donald Trump, trying to get under his skin and bring out the worst of Donald Trump, which we have seen on the debate stage in the past. Karine Jean-Pierre, the White House spokesperson, told reporters on the way here that they will, she said, you know the president is a fighter. That's the kind of frame of mind he appears to be in. He made an unannounced stop amongst voters here in Atlanta, Georgia. This state, of course, one of the battleground states. So he looks in decent form. The question will be, can he withstand the endurance test mentally and physically, given the kind of thing we've seen in the past, viral moments that haven't helped him?
Yeah, indeed. And those are the moments that Donald Trump will really be looking for so that he can go after him when it comes to his age, for example. But as you said at the beginning of our conversation, the polls have been stubborn, and Donald Trump is, frankly, leading in all the polls.
Yeah, he is, Yalda. He's had a wobble, mind you, in the past couple of weeks following his conviction, but there's a 5-3 out, a 5-3-8 poll of the national average. We can bring you figures on that, and it still looks good for Trump. He's on 41% compared to 40.9% for Joe Biden. Robert Kennedy Jr. comes in at 9.2%. Interestingly, Trump's advisors have told him that in this debate he should concentrate on the subject matter that they think works for him. Inflation, the state of the economy, crime, immigration. The difficulty might be the infrastructure, the choreography, microphones that are cut off, no audience. Donald Trump's a man who feeds off an audience. Tonight, he will be under pressure to deliver well-rounded arguments about his politics and the way forward for the country. Team Biden certainly think they can score on that because Donald Trump, they think, is a man who needs the comfort of applause at the end of a sentence.
And no doubt, James, you will be covering every twist and turn for us. Thank you so much for bringing us up to date. And we will bring you the first presidential debate live here on Sky News overnight between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. Make sure to join us for that. After the break, we'll take a closer look at that issue taking centre stage before tonight's debate. The Supreme Court has ruled that emergency abortions can go ahead in the state of Idaho, one of the most sensitive topics ever, even without an election. We'll hear from those who've campaigned for and against the decision. Welcome back. As we were saying earlier, abortion rights is a key issue waiting for whoever takes over the White House at the end of this year. Just hours before the first presidential televised debate, the Supreme Court ruled emergency abortions can go ahead in the state of Idaho. It comes 2 years after the overturning of Roe v. Wade, when Idaho was among 14 states that outlawed abortion at all stages with limited exceptions. The current president's campaign were quick to react. Have a look.
Donald Trump did this. He put women's lives in danger. This election is the most important election of my generation and my daughter's generation. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will protect our fundamental rights, putting healthcare decisions back in the hands of women and their doctors.
I'm Joe Biden, and I approve this message.
Well, let's bring in our Martha Kellner, who joins me live now. And Martha, I guess we could call this a win for the Biden administration, although it does feel less of a victory and more of a delay.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Yalda. On the face of it, this is a victory for the Biden administration, which has fought against this Idaho state law and for pro-abortion advocates too. The situation until today in Idaho was a near total ban on abortion with very few exceptions. Exceptions in the case of rape, incest and where the mother's life was at risk. And it's that third factor that was key, because we've been speaking to doctors in medical settings who have had to send women in very dire situations, women who were hemorrhaging, women whose waters had broken dangerously early in pregnancy. They were having to get those women airlifted out of Idaho, travelling hundreds of miles in order to access that abortion health care that they needed. Well, this opinion by the Supreme Court handed down today temporarily restores access to abortion health care for women whose health is at risk, as well as their life being at risk. But we should note that this is not a complete victory, because this decision has essentially been kicked down the road. This has been handed back to the lower courts in Idaho. It also has no impact on the other more than a dozen states who also have near total abortion bans. One thing is for certain, though, and that's that Democrats are keeping a laser focus on abortion. They believe it's a factor that could help Joe Biden beat Donald Trump in the general election in November.
Martha, thank you, as always, for all of that. I'm joined now by Katie Mahoney, pro-life campaigner with Purple Sash Revolution, and the pro-choice campaigner, Jen Jackson-Quintano. Thank you both for joining us here on the programme. I'm going to come to you, Katie, first. I mean, it's quite extraordinary, isn't it, when you think about it being 2024. We're just listening to our correspondent there talking about women hemorrhaging and having to be airlifted out, and the sorts of risks to the lives of these women because they can't have access to the medical care that they need, namely abortion in this instance. But of course, now it's been temporarily overturned.
Thank you for having me, Yalda. It's nice to be on here. So actually, Justice Barrett, in her opinion, said, her quote was, "Idaho's ability to enforce its law remains entirely intact." So this has really not been a ban it's not overturning anything. And emergency medical care has always been available for the women of Idaho. And in fact, I work with Stanton Healthcare, which is a life-affirming women's clinic. We are a fully accredited AAAHC medical clinic for women facing unexpected pregnancies. And so the women of Idaho actually lobbied to get this bill passed to protect life and protect children. So women have always been protected. In the Idaho legislature, they made it so that women's lives were not in danger. And so a woman does not need abortion as health care. Elective abortion is not health care. When you were talking about an emergency medical care procedure that is needed, such as an ectopic pregnancy or miscarriage treatment, of course, that is medical care. They are not elective abortions. And that is actually
I guess it's about choice, isn't it? And basic human rights.
Well, actually, we're human rights activists. We think that the human rights actually belong also to the preborn child. So that would be a matter of how you interpret that, because this is something that is very important, that over half of the states in America believe that the preborn child should be protected. And so we treat them both as a patient, Yalda. When a woman comes into the emergency room, both the mother and the child are patients that need to be treated. And so
I'm just going to, Katie, bring in Jen into the conversation. You're just listening there to Katie. And of course, this is an issue that has divided America, but just your views on what Katie is saying and the ruling today in Idaho.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that abortion and reproductive rights, it's a human rights issue, and it is a healthcare issue. And there are numerous situations in which abortion is necessary to the care of a pregnant patient. And unfortunately, here in Idaho, physicians are facing some difficulty understanding when it is that they can act to prevent the death of a patient. It's really unclear. And this decision from the Supreme Court, or rather a lack of a decision for the time being, it helps clarify that in emergency situations, now Idaho physicians can act to preserve not just the life, but the health of their patients, which is helpful.
Katie's saying that that's always been the case, and that abortion is actually not healthcare. Do you agree with that?
Elective abortion.
Elective abortion.
I believe that abortion is healthcare in so many instances, and it's impossible to list all the instances in which abortion is necessary as healthcare. And I will put it out there, I am someone who had an abortion once, and I'm very open and upfront about that. And I was in an abusive relationship at the time. And I can see where you might look at my story and say that is not an act of healthcare, but it was certainly an act of mercy for me in a really difficult life situation where I didn't have any freedom. And I shudder to think at what my life would be like today if I were still tethered to my former husband. It's difficult to think about. So,
Katie, just listening there to Jen and her own personal story and how this would have impacted her if she didn't have these choices. I mean, rights groups internationally are describing the current situation in the United States as a human rights crisis, and especially when we hear this kind of stories like Jen's.
I have very much compassion for Jen, and I understand that it's a difficult situation that women face. That's one reason we have Stanton Healthcare, and we have thousands of pregnancy resource centers across the country. We feel that children are not a burden, they are a blessing. And while it's not always the good time for everyone, it's something like almost 96% of all abortions are just done electively without having any reason for, in terms of a crisis. There's no rape or incest. There's no situation where they are having any kind of life-threatening situation. So we are there for the women to help them. And of course, this is going to be an issue that's a sort of a divisive issue. It's true, because we believe it in a different way than you do. But we believe human rights begin in the womb. And so we are protecting the human lives of these children as well as the women. So we can tell you story after story of the women who have come to us who were facing an unexpected pregnancy that had a lot of issues and a lot of problems. A man, one of the girls had her boyfriend put a gun to his head and said, if you don't have an abortion, I'm going to kill myself. And so she actually now has a beautiful 14-year-old. My point is, there are abusive situations with abortion very, very often, where women often feel coerced and pressured into it, and they really don't want to, if they only had the resource and the hope that they need.
Yeah, and then pro-choice people like Jen are saying that this is about basic human rights and healthcare. Thank you both for joining us here on the program.
Thank you.
This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim. After the break, we'll talk about one presidential election where voters don't actually have much of a say. Iranians go to the polls tomorrow, but with the country's supreme leaders calling the shots, could any president really make lasting change?
This exhibition left Ukraine in November of 2022, in the midst of the war, when Kyiv was constantly bombarded. And our idea was to show this art to European public, and at the same time to take it out of harm ways. That was a very complicated operation, I have to tell you, because we made a mistake, because we thought that we are very smart. Russians were bombing Kyiv every week on Monday, and we decided that we will go on Tuesday. And of course, that Tuesday was the most intensive bombardment of the whole Ukrainian territory. Fortunately, our trucks left Kyiv before this bombardment started. By the end of the day, they reached Polish border. We were ready to open champagne. And in this moment, some straight rocket exploded at the Polish territory. You remember probably that incident, and everybody decided that it's the beginning of the Third World War. Poles closed the border, and our trucks stayed on the border. So it was unbelievable diplomatic effort. Ukrainian diplomats worked telephones. Fortunately, nobody slept in Poland on that night. And in the morning, Polish authorities just flagged our trucks to Polish territory, and they reached Madrid on time. We started in Madrid, then this exhibition came to Cologne, then to the Royal Museum of Fine Arts in Brussels, then to Vienna. In Vienna, it was enlarged 2 times. Then we divided this exhibition. It's made chronologically, so we created know-how of exhibition which could be, separated or attached together. And one part of it, we opened exhibition last week in the National Gallery of Slovakia, and this week people could see it in London. It's covering the first half of the 20th century, from the beginning to 1930s.
Welcome back. Well, we talked about this being an election year earlier on in the programme, and tomorrow it will be the turn of Iranians to choose their president after the death of President Raisi in a helicopter crash in May. But this won't be democracy in action. The short list has been approved by the Supreme Leader, the man who ultimately wields total control. Well, I'm joined in the studio now by Kazra Arabi, from United Against Nuclear Iran. Thank you very much, Kazra, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Here on the programme. I guess on some level, when the Russian election happened, I asked the Russian ambassador, what's the point? Why are you feigning democracy? And it feels very similar in this instance as well.
Absolutely. Let's make it very clear from the offset to your viewers. These are not free or fair elections. The regime in Iran is a totalitarian regime. Power is in absolute form in the hands of the 85-year-old Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. And this is really a circus. It's known as Sirke Intikhabat in Farsi, the election circus. It's designed really to fool the outside world. This is a veneer of electoral participation to hide and shield that totalitarian nature. Power is absolutely in control of Khamenei, his office, the Beit Rahbari, and the IRGC, his ideological paramilitary organization. So it is a circus.
And I guess it's about trying to get people out on the streets, because we've got 2 hardline candidates and one that's being described as a reformer.
So-called reformists.
But again, chosen by the Supreme Leader and the establishment.
Yes, so the overwhelming majority of Iranians will be boycotting tomorrow's vote. They have done so for the past 5 years explicitly. And really, Khamenei's reason All the candidates, by the way, are hand-selected by Khamenei.
Let's actually bring them in, and so you can talk us through each of the candidates. This is one of the candidates.
Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf. Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, a IRGC commander, current Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, a very hardline ideological figure. But what's Ghalibaf known for? He is known as the IRGC's most corrupt commander, and that's quite a title to earn, given the fact that corruption is rampant in the IRGC.
And then we've got Saeed Jalili.
Saeed Jalili, the former hardline nuclear negotiator, a real Khamenei zealot. Jalili is probably the closest manifestation to a Raisi 2.0. He is currently the Supreme Leader's representative to the Supreme National Security Council. This is the highest foreign policy and security decision-making body. He is an ideological zealot, zero personality, zero ambition, zero charisma. These are all traits, by the way, that Khamenei likes because it makes those individuals much easier to control.
And then there's the so-called reformer, Masoud Pezeshkian.
The so-called reformist, and let's put reformist in inverted quotation marks. This is Masoud Pezeshkian, who's been permitted to run by Khamenei with this veneer of reformism. But let's make it clear, Pezeshkian fully supported the violent crackdown in 2022 after Mahsa Amini, the 22-year-old Iranian girl, was killed for improper hijab. He actually blamed women for not appropriately being educated to wear their hijabs properly. He has also very explicitly said that he is there to carry out the will of the Supreme Leader. And that's what tomorrow is all about. There's only one vote that counts, and that's Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. The rest is just for show.
Kazra, really interesting listening to what you have to say, and we'll be watching developments overnight to see who of those three candidates ends up coming up on top. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Now, two elections in Iran and the United States, both consequential. Will Joe Biden prove his detractors wrong? How will Donald Trump perform without audience applause? Tune in from 2 a.m. to find out. That's it for this week. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll be back on Monday. Goodbye for now. Thank you so much. Really